34 years of silence. That's how long Austin, Texas carried the weight of December 6, 1991, the night 4 teenage girls closed a yogurt shop and never came home. Jennifer Harbison, 17, steady and protective. Her sister Sarah, 15, all laughter and light. Eliza Thomas, 17, loyal to the end. Amy Ayers, 13, just along for the ride. By midnight, their names would be etched into the city's memory, alongside smoke and ash. By morning, investigators would face a puzzle with missing pieces, shell casings in the ruins, DNA destroyed by water and flame, and a community demanding answers that wouldn't come for decades. 4 men confessed, 4 men went to prison, 4 men were later freed when DNA proved their innocence. The real killer remained a ghost until September 2025, when forensic genealogy whispered a dead man's name, Robert Eugene Brashers. But can justice truly arrive when delivered by a grave? Before we get into the story, drop a comment with your country and the time right now. December 6, 1991. The I Can't Believe It's Yogurt shop glows beneath fluorescent lights in a North Austin strip mall. Jennifer Harbison mops the checkerboard floor with practiced efficiency, while her 15-year-old sister Sarah counts the register, giggling at something Eliza Thomas whispered. Amy Ayers, just 13, perches on a counter stool, swinging her legs and waiting for her ride home. The night carries December's chill, but inside the shop, normalcy reigns. Jennifer checks her watch. 9:45 p.m., closing time. She's done this routine dozens of times before, but tonight feels different somehow. A man lingers near the back entrance, his face obscured by shadows. Did you lock the back door? Jennifer asks Eliza, who nods but glances toward the rear of the shop with uncertainty. Outside, cars pass on Anderson Lane, their headlights sweeping across the windows. The shopping center settles into evening, quiet. A tampered lock will later tell investigators that someone had been planning this moment. Neighbors would later remember North Austin as a place where parents didn't worry about teenage daughters working late shifts. That innocence was about to die alongside 4 young lives. At 10:15 p.m., the time cards show the girls clocked out. By 10:30, surveillance from nearby stores captures 2 men entering the yogurt shop, but their faces remain unclear. The girls, trusting and unaware, unlock the door one final time. Sarah's laughter echoes through the empty mall. Amy asks if she can have another frozen yogurt sample. Jennifer reminds everyone to finish quickly. They all have school tomorrow. By 11 p.m., the store falls silent. No more voices, no more laughter, only the hum of freezers and the slow tick of a wall clock counting down to tragedy. At 11:47 p.m., flames burst through the roof, turning the yogurt shop into a funeral pyre that will haunt Austin for 34 years. December 7, 1991, 2 a.m. Fire engines pierce the night as volunteer firefighters crash through the shop's front entrance. Steam rises from melted plastic and charred counters. The acrid smell of burned dreams fills the air. Detective John Jones arrives as firefighters retreat. Their job done, but their faces grim. The scene they reveal stops him cold. 4 bodies, bound with their own clothing, lie among the wreckage. Each girl was shot execution style before the fire began. Water damage has erased most potential DNA evidence, but investigators recover crucial fragments, 22 and 380 caliber shell casings scattered among the debris. The medical examiner's preliminary findings suggest sexual assault preceded the murders. This wasn't random, it was calculated evil. By sunrise, crime scene photographers document every angle while Austin wakes to devastating headlines. 4 Austin girls slain in yogurt shop horror. The Austin American-Statesman's front page shows the burned storefront beside school photos of 4 smiling teenagers. Lieutenant Paul Johnson stands in the ruins, his notebook filled with questions that have no answers. The arson destroyed fingerprints, fabric evidence, and DNA samples that might have solved the case immediately. All that remains are shell casings, witness accounts of 2 men seen inside, and a community's shattered sense of safety. Radio dispatchers field hundreds of calls from terrified parents. Local schools increase security. The University of Texas warned students to travel in groups. What was once Austin's quiet northern suburb now feels like a place where monsters lurk behind every shadow. Detective Jones kneels beside a melted cash register, whispering a promise that will echo through decades. We will find who did this. But as investigators begin interviewing witnesses and collecting statements, one devastating reality becomes clear. The crime scene itself has been compromised beyond repair. They're hunting killers with evidence turned to ash. The days following December 7th become a blur of desperate investigation. Austin Police Department's Homicide Division transforms into a war room where leads pile higher than case files. Detective Johnson pins photos of Jennifer, Sarah, Eliza, and Amy on a corkboard that becomes a shrine to persistence. Tips flood the phone lines, hundreds of calls from citizens who saw something, heard something, or simply need to help. Among them, investigators focus on a man spotted at nearby North Cross Mall carrying a .22 caliber pistol just hours before the murders. His name goes to the top of the suspect list. Ballistics tests crush the first glimmer of hope. The ammunition matches, but the gun isn't the murder weapon. Close, but not close enough. In criminal investigations, close might as well be a universe away. Forensic analysis confirms what investigators suspected: multiple firearms were used, suggesting more than one shooter. The .22 caliber bullets came from one gun, the 380 seconds from another. Two weapons, two killers. The scope of the hunt doubles overnight. Witness statements contradict each other in frustrating ways. Some saw two men entering the shop near closing time. Others insist they saw three. Descriptions range from teenagers to middle-aged adults. Fear has a way of distorting memory, turning shadows into suspects, and suspects into phantoms. Television news crews camp outside Austin Police Headquarters, demanding daily updates on a case that seems to lead nowhere. Public pressure mounts with each passing week. City council meetings become forums for angry citizens demanding justice for 4 innocent girls. By spring 1992, the case board fills with dead ends, alibis that check out, suspects who pass polygraphs, evidence that leads to more questions than answers. Detectives work 18-hour days, chasing ghosts, through a maze of false leads and broken promises. As weeks turn to months, and months stretch toward years, Austin learns a painful truth. Sometimes the monsters win, at least for now. 1992 bleeds into 1993, then 1994, then beyond. The yogurt shop murders become Austin's most infamous unsolved case, a wound that refuses to heal. Detective shifts change, but the 4 photos remain pinned to the caseboard: Jennifer's senior portrait, Sarah's sophomore smile, Eliza's homecoming picture, Amy's school headshot. Files stack higher in storage rooms. New detectives inherit old frustrations. The case becomes a rite of passage. Every investigator in homicide takes a turn studying the evidence, hoping fresh eyes might see what others missed. Annual vigils mark December 6th outside the rebuilt shopping center. Families light candles, while reporters interview aging witnesses who remember less each year. Memory fades, but pain endures. The 1990s introduced new forensic techniques. DNA analysis becomes more sophisticated. Computer databases expand, profiling methods evolve, but the yogurt shop case remains frozen in time, its evidence too damaged by fire and water to benefit from scientific advances. Rumors persist in coffee shops and neighborhood gatherings. Some say the killers left Austin immediately after the murders. Others believe they're still here, hiding in plain sight. Conspiracy theories bloom in the absence of facts. Drug deals gone wrong, satanic rituals, random psychopaths passing through town. By 1998, Austin has grown from a quirky college town into a booming tech hub. New residents arrive daily, many unaware of the tragedy that once gripped the city. But longtime locals remember. They remember the fear, the vigils, the promise that justice would eventually come. Late that year, a new generation of cold case detectives opens the files once more. Digital technology allows them to enhance old photographs, digitize witness statements, and cross-reference evidence with national databases. The case that seemed dead begins to stir again, waiting for the right moment to reveal its secrets. 1999 brings new hope in the form of 4 names: Maurice Pierce, Michael Scott, Robert Springsteen, and Forrest Wellborn. Young men with troubled pasts, they surface through a combination of jailhouse informants and relentless detective work. Pierce, charismatic but impulsive, becomes the initial focus. His name appears in witness statements, usually attached to phrases like maybe and could have been. In investigations, desperate for progress, maybe becomes grounds for deeper scrutiny. Scott emerges next, quiet, nervous, easily influenced. Friends describe him as someone who follows rather than leads, making him an unlikely mastermind but a possible accomplice. His anxiety during questioning raises red flags among investigators who've learned to read body language like scripture. Springsteen proves more volatile, shifting between cooperation and defiance. During interviews, his emotional instability makes him both a compelling suspect and an unreliable witness to his own actions. Detectives sense vulnerability beneath his anger. Wellborn remains peripheral, a shadow figure whose brief involvement highlights the scattershot nature of the investigation. His connection to the others is tenuous, but in a case this cold, even thin threads deserve tugging. Interrogation rooms become theaters of psychological pressure. Hours stretch into days as detectives employ techniques designed to break down resistance. Sleep deprivation, repeated questioning, promises of leniency, threats of harsh punishment. All legal tactics in 1999, all devastating to vulnerable minds. Then comes the breakthrough investigators have waited 8 years to hear. Confessions. Scott cracks first, his words tumbling out in a desperate bid for redemption. Springsteen follows, each man implicating the other in a cycle of blame that satisfies no one but convinces prosecutors. Austin exhales collectively as headlines proclaim, "Yogurt shop killers caught." But beneath the celebration, a troubling question lingers if these men committed the crime. Why does no physical evidence connect them to the scene? Spring 2000 brings the trials Austin has demanded for nearly a decade. Travis County Courthouse becomes ground zero for a legal battle that will determine whether justice wears the face of truth or the mask of desperation. Prosecution presents the confessions like holy relics, sacred texts that finally explain the unexplainable. Tape recordings fill the courtroom with Scott's nervous admissions and Springsteen's angry accusations. To grieving families, these words sound like closure wrapped in guilt. Defense attorneys attack the confessions with surgical precision, highlighting the coercive conditions under which they were obtained. 18-hour interrogations. No food, no sleep. Psychological manipulation designed to break the innocent alongside the guilty. The most damning evidence against the prosecution is also the most glaring. No DNA from any of the 4 defendants matches evidence recovered from the crime scene, not from skin cells, not from blood, not from semen. The 2 most reliable forms of physical evidence tell the same story. These men weren't there, yet emotion overwhelms science in the jury box. Families of the victims fill the gallery, their presence a constant reminder of lives stolen and justice delayed. When prosecutors describe the girls' final moments, even hardened court reporters wipe away tears. Jennifer's mother sits in the front row every day, clutching a photo of her daughters at last Christmas. Her silent vigil speaks louder than any testimony about the need for anyone to pay for her family's destruction. Defense objections about inadmissible evidence and coerced confessions fall on ears deafened by grief. The jury sees 4 dead girls and 4 living suspects, and the mathematics of justice seems simple. Verdicts arrive like thunderclaps. Guilty. Springsteen receives death. Scott gets life. Pierce and Wellborn face separate trials later. As the gavel falls, Austin believes its long nightmare has finally ended. 2002 through 2009 become years of appeals, reversals, and growing doubt. Death row inmates often claim innocence, but Springsteen and Scott's legal team presents evidence that chills even seasoned prosecutors. Advanced DNA testing emerges as the case's salvation and its curse. Vaginal swab samples preserved since 1991 undergo new analysis techniques that weren't available during the original investigation. The results shatter the prosecution's narrative like glass hitting concrete. Unknown male DNA, a complete genetic profile that matches none of the 4 defendants. The biological evidence, the most reliable witness to any sexual assault, speaks with scientific certainty. The killer is someone else. Entirely. Talk radio explodes with outrage and confusion. If Springsteen and Scott didn't commit the murders, who did? And why did they confess to crimes they didn't commit? Austin discovers that false confessions aren't Hollywood fiction, they're documented psychological phenomena that destroy innocent lives. Legal experts dissect the interrogation techniques used in 1999, finding textbook examples of coercion disguised as professional investigation. Sleep deprivation becomes torture. Repeated questioning becomes brainwashing. Promises of leniency become manipulation. The Austin American-Statesman runs investigative series examining wrongful convictions nationwide. The yogurt shop case becomes a cautionary tale about the danger of solving crimes with confessions alone, especially when physical evidence points elsewhere. Public opinion fractures along predictable lines. Some cling to the original convictions, unable to accept that the justice system failed so spectacularly. Others demand immediate release of the wrongly accused. Families of the victims find themselves caught between grief and growing uncertainty. In 2009, the inevitable happens. Charges against all 4 men are dropped. Springsteen walks out of death row after nearly a decade of imprisonment for crimes he didn't commit. Scott follows, his life forever changed by a system that traded his freedom for the illusion of closure. Austin faces an uncomfortable truth: its most notorious killers remain unidentified and free. The 2010s arrive, with the yogurt shop case colder than ever. Springsteen and Scott disappear into anonymity, their names forever linked to Austin's greatest investigative failure. Public interest wanes as newer tragedies capture headlines and shorter attention spans. But some refuse to let the case die. Family members maintain websites dedicated to the victim's memory. Amateur sleuths discuss theories on internet forums. Cold case detectives inherit files that seem destined for eternal storage. Netflix produces a documentary series that brings national attention back to Austin's unsolved mystery. Viewers around the world learn about 4 innocent girls and a justice system that failed them twice. First by letting killers escape, then by imprisoning the innocent. Archived evidence samples sit in temperature-controlled storage, waiting for science to advance far enough to unlock their secrets. The 22 and 380 shell casings gather dust alongside hair fibers, fingernail scrapings, and biological samples too degraded for 1990s technology. Academic conferences feature the yogurt shop case as a textbook example of investigative tunnel vision. Police academies teach courses on false confessions using Springsteen and Scott's statements as primary source material. Their tragedy becomes educational content for future investigators. Retired Detective Johnson, now in his 70s, occasionally visits the Memorial Plaza built where the yogurt shop once stood. He carries business cards with the case number and his personal phone number, just in case someone remembers something important. Local media runs anniversary stories every December 6th, interviewing aging witnesses and updating the public on non-existent progress. The stories become shorter each year, relegated to inside pages as Austin moves forward while 4 girls remain frozen in time. By 2025, most assume the case will never be solved. The killers are probably dead, the evidence too degraded, the witnesses too scattered. Cold cases from the 1990s belong to history, not headlines. They're about to be proven spectacularly wrong. January 2025 brings new technology to old evidence. Austin Police Department's Cold Case Unit receives funding for advanced DNA analysis techniques that didn't exist even 5 years earlier. ESTR sequencing can now extract genetic information from samples previously considered worthless. Detective Maria Santos, assigned to the yogurt shop case 6 months earlier, requests priority processing for the 1991 biological samples. The DNA that exonerated 4 innocent men might finally identify the real killer, if enough genetic material survived 3 decades of storage. ESTR analysis focuses on the male chromosome, passed virtually unchanged from father to son through generations. Unlike traditional DNA testing that requires pristine samples, YSTR can work with degraded evidence, opening cold cases thought permanently frozen. The Austin American-Statesman runs a small story about renewed testing, buried on page 6 beneath more pressing local news. Most readers skip past it, unaware they're witnessing the first stirrings of justice delayed but not denied. Santos studies crime scene photos with fresh eyes, looking for evidence previous investigators might have missed. The burned yogurt shop yields new details under digital enhancement angles that weren't visible in 1991 photographs. Shadows that might contain crucial information. Laboratory technicians in white coats extract DNA from samples that survived fire, water, and time. The process takes weeks, each step carefully documented to ensure legal admissibility. Science moves slowly, but with inexorable precision toward truth. Local online forums buzz with speculation about the renewed investigation. True crime enthusiasts dissect every public detail, building theories from fragments of information. Some predictions prove remarkably accurate. Others venture into fantasy. By spring, the genetic laboratory will deliver results that change everything. A male DNA profile emerges from samples that seem destroyed beyond recovery. A genetic fingerprint pointing toward answers Austin has sought for 34 years. February 2025. Virginia. C.C. Moore's Genetic Genealogy Laboratory receives the most important case of her career. The partial YSTR profile from Austin represents thousands of hours of painstaking scientific work distilled into digital data that might finally reveal a killer's identity. Moore built her reputation solving cold cases through genetic triangulation, tracing unknown DNA through family trees until names emerge from genetic shadows. Her success rate borders on miraculous, but the yogurt shop case presents unique challenges. The DNA sample is degraded, offering only partial genetic markers. Traditional genealogy requires complete profiles, but Moore has learned to work with fragments, building family trees from genetic breadcrumbs that others might discard as worthless. Computer algorithms search through millions of genealogical records, looking for mathematical connections between the unknown profile and documented family lines. The process resembles detective work performed by machines, patient, methodical, and relentlessly logical. Online genealogy databases contain genetic information from millions of Americans who submitted DNA samples to learn about their ancestry. They unknowingly created the largest criminal identification system in human history, accessible to investigators through legal warrants and scientific analysis. A surname surfaces from the digital ocean of genetic data, Brashers. The name means nothing to Austin investigators, but Moore's team begins tracing the family line through census records, birth certificates, and marriage licenses, spanning 2 centuries. The genealogical trail leads to Missouri, then branches across the Midwest like a genetic river system. Each family member becomes a potential suspect or witness, their lives suddenly relevant to a 34-year-old crime they've never heard of. Moore's excitement builds as the family tree takes shape. Somewhere in this maze of names and dates and genetic connections lies the identity of Austin's most wanted killer. By April, Missouri police will be contacted about exhuming a grave that might hold the final answer. April 2025, Cape Girardeau, Missouri. Morning mist rises from the cemetery as investigators prepare to disturb a grave that's been peaceful since 1999. Robert Eugene Brashers died by suicide after a police standoff, taking secrets with him that might have saved Austin decades of uncertainty. Exhumation requires court orders, family notifications, and careful documentation. The process feels macabre, disturbing the dead to bring justice to the living, but science demands physical confirmation of genetic theories. Brashers died as a suspected serial killer, linked to multiple unsolved cases across the South through ballistics evidence and behavioral patterns. His suicide ended an interstate investigation but left questions unanswered about crimes that might never be solved. Forensic technicians work with archaeological precision, treating the grave site like a crime scene that might contain evidence crucial to prosecuting a dead man. Bone samples and dental remains will undergo DNA analysis to confirm or eliminate Brashers as Austin's killer. The YSTR comparison takes weeks. Laboratory technicians isolate genetic material from teeth and femur bones, extracting DNA that survived burial and decomposition. Modern technology makes identification possible from biological samples that would have been useless in 1991. Results arrive with mathematical certainty, 99.9% probability of match. Robert Eugene Brashers, dead for 26 years, carries the same genetic markers found in evidence from the yogurt shop murders. National media outlets pick up the story as it breaks across true crime communities online. The case that seemed permanently cold suddenly burns with renewed investigation. But genetic identification raises as many questions as it answers. Was Brashers in Austin on December 6, 1991? Did he act alone? How did investigators miss him for 34 years? Map pins connect Missouri to Texas as investigators trace Brashers' movements through the early 1990s. His nomadic lifestyle as a traveling mechanic provided perfect cover for interstate criminal activity. May 2025, FBI Forensic Laboratory, Quantico. The .380 shell casing, recovered from Austin's crime scene, undergoes ballistics comparison with evidence from unsolved cases across the nation. Digital databases containing millions of bullet signatures search for matches that might connect Brashers to other crimes. The comparison system works like fingerprint analysis, identifying unique markings that firearms leave on ammunition. Every gun barrel contains microscopic imperfections that create distinctive patterns on bullets and shell casing signatures as unique as human DNA. A match emerges from Kentucky, an unsolved 1992 murder bearing Brashers' ballistic fingerprint. The victim, a young woman killed during a robbery gone wrong, died from .380 caliber rounds fired from the same weapon used in Austin. FBI agents build a timeline of Brashers' criminal activity, tracing his path through multiple states during the early 1990s. The pattern reveals a nomadic predator who used mobility as a weapon, striking in communities where his face was unknown and his methods unexpected. Brashers' modus operandi becomes clearer with each connected case, binding victims with available materials, sexual assault followed by execution-style shooting, and arson to destroy evidence. The yogurt shop murders fit his pattern: perfectly calculated violence designed to eliminate witnesses and obscure forensic evidence. Public disbelief grows as the scope of Brashers' crimes becomes apparent. How could one man kill across multiple states for years without detection? The answer lies in the primitive state of criminal databases in the 1990s, when jurisdictions rarely shared information and DNA analysis was in its infancy. Some officials privately express concern about reopening wounds from the wrongful convictions. Admitting that Brashers was the real killer means acknowledging that 4 innocent men suffered nearly a decade of imprisonment, while the actual perpetrator remained free. Then comes the breakthrough that eliminates all doubt. Fingernail scrapings from Amy Ayers, the youngest victim, yield DNA evidence that survived 34 years of storage. June 2025 delivers the midpoint revelation that transforms theory into certainty. DNA extracted from Amy Ayer's fingernail scrapings matches Robert Eugene Brasher's with scientific precision that courts will accept without question. The 13-year-old girl who died trying to defend herself left behind genetic evidence that would eventually identify her killer. Her fingernails contained skin cells torn from Brasher's during their final struggle. A silent witness preserved by medical examiners who couldn't know their careful work would solve the case 3 decades later. Combined STR and YSTR profiles create a genetic portrait of the killer that matches Brasher's with statistical certainty beyond reasonable doubt. Defense attorneys will find no scientific ground for questioning the identification. Laboratory technicians who processed the evidence feel the weight of history in their work. The same fingernail scrapings that seemed worthless in 1991 now speak with Amy's voice from beyond the grave, finally naming the monster who stole her future. Vigils rekindle outside the Memorial Plaza as news of the breakthrough spreads through social media and local news outlets. Families who waited 34 years for answers prepare themselves for confirmation that justice, however delayed, has finally arrived. The revelation sparks debate about whether Brasher's acted alone. Witness statements from 1991 described 2 men entering the yogurt shop, but genetic evidence points to a single perpetrator. Memory fades and distorts, especially under trauma and time pressure. District Attorney's Office begins drafting public statements that will formally announce the breakthrough while addressing the wrongful convictions that preceded it. The words must balance celebration of scientific achievement with acknowledgement of systemic failure. By September, the world will know Robert Eugene Brasher's name and understand how genetic genealogy succeeded where traditional investigation failed. The announcement will generate international headlines and restart conversations about false confessions, wrongful convictions, and the transformative power of advancing forensic science. September 2025, Austin Police Department Headquarters. Media crews pack the press conference room as Police Chief Rebecca Martinez and District Attorney Jose Hernandez prepare to reveal 34 years of investigative work culminating in scientific certainty. Camera flashes illuminate forensic charts displaying DNA evidence, ballistics comparisons, and geographical timelines that trace Brasher's criminal path across multiple states. The presentation resembles a doctoral defense where the thesis is justice delayed but finally delivered. After exhaustive scientific analysis, Chief Martinez announces, "We can now state with complete confidence that Robert Eugene Brasher's committed the yogurt shop murders on December 6, 1991. The room erupts in questions shouted by reporters hungry for details. How was he identified? Why did it take so long? What about the 4 men who confessed? Each answer reveals another layer of investigative complexity, spanning 3 decades. Dr. Sandra Walsh, the forensic scientist who processed Amy's fingernail evidence, explains how modern DNA techniques extracted genetic information from samples that seemed worthless in 1991. Her testimony transforms technical jargon into human language that conveys the miraculous nature of the identification. Ballistics. Expert James Rodriguez displays photographic evidence linking the Austin .380 shell casing to murders in Kentucky and Tennessee. Brasher's weapon spoke across state lines and decades, finally identifying its owner through microscopic striations invisible to 1990s technology. D.A. Hernandez addresses the elephant in the room. Robert Eugene Brasher's cannot face trial for these crimes because he died in 1999. However, justice includes exonerating those wrongfully convicted and ensuring the historical record reflects the truth. Applause mingles with tears as family members embrace in the back of the room. Jennifer's mother, now in her 70s, holds a photograph of her daughters, while cameras capture her mixture of grief and relief. The press conference generates international headlines and trending social media topics. Austin's most notorious cold case becomes a textbook example of scientific persistence overcoming investigative limitations. The week following the press conference brings legal ceremonies that formally acknowledge 34 years of investigative error. Travis County Courthouse becomes the site of vindication for 4 men whose lives were destroyed by false confessions and tunnel vision. District Attorney Hernandez meets privately with Robert Springsteen and Michael Scott before the public proceedings. The conversation, witnessed only by attorneys, addresses decades of injustice, with words that cannot repair lost time, but acknowledge suffering that should never have occurred. Pierce and Wellborn, whose cases ended differently but whose reputations suffered equally, receive similar meetings. The state's acknowledgement of error comes decades late but arrives with legal protections that will clear their records permanently. Motion for formal exoneration requires judicial approval, but Judge Patricia Williams expedites the process given the overwhelming DNA evidence. Her signature transforms 4 wrongfully convicted men into official victims of a broken system. Crowds gather outside the courthouse chanting, "Justice, not revenge," reflecting public understanding that clearing innocent names matters as much as identifying guilty parties. The demonstration remains peaceful, focused on systemic reform rather than individual blame. Legal hurdles regarding compensation and record clearing will require months to resolve, but the essential work is complete. Texas acknowledges that its criminal justice system failed spectacularly while promising reforms to prevent future wrongful convictions. Inside the courthouse, families of the original victims prepare to face reporters and explain how 34 years of uncertainty has affected their lives. The cameras will capture their dignity and resilience, but no lens can document the internal cost of grief prolonged by false hope and misdirected anger. Jennifer's mother clutches photographs of her daughters, knowing that truth has finally emerged, but understanding that justice without accountability feels incomplete when the killer died before facing consequences. Autumn 2025 finds Austin processing 34 years of misdirected grief and investigative failure. The community that once demanded swift justice now confronts the reality that rushing toward answers often leads away from truth. Public archives display crime scene photographs, investigation timelines, and court documents that tell the complete story of the yogurt shop case. Visitors study evidence that seemed conclusive in 1999, but appears deeply flawed through the lens of scientific advancement. Brasher's criminal history emerges through FBI investigation, revealing a pattern of interstate violence that claimed multiple victims across the South. Austin's tragedy becomes part of a larger story about a predator who used mobility and charm to avoid detection for years. Documentary filmmakers arrive to capture interviews with investigators, family members, and wrongfully convicted men whose experiences will educate future generations about the dangers of confession-based prosecutions. Their stories become teaching tools for police academies and law schools. Family members wrestle with complex emotions that don't fit neatly into media narratives. Relief at knowing the truth mixes with anger about delays and wrongful convictions. Closure feels incomplete when the killer escaped earthly justice through suicide. Retirement communities throughout Austin host discussions about the case, as residents who lived through the original investigation share memories with younger neighbors who learned about it through documentaries and podcasts. The rebuilt shopping center where the yogurt shop once stood becomes an unofficial pilgrimage site for true crime enthusiasts who travel to Austin specifically to see where the murders occurred. Local businesses adapt to the influx of visitors drawn by morbid curiosity and genuine sympathy. Evening candlelight vigils outside the memorial honor not just the 4 victims, but also the wrongfully convicted men, whose suffering added layers of tragedy to an already horrific crime. The story's complexity defies simple narratives about good versus evil. October 2025 brings national spotlight to Austin's decades-long journey, from tragedy through injustice toward truth. Media outlets dissect the case as a paradigm shift in cold case investigation, highlighting how genetic genealogy succeeded where traditional methods failed. Cable news networks produce hour-long specials, examining Brasher's pattern of violence across multiple states. His methodology, binding victims, sexual assault, execution-style shooting, and arson created a signature that connected crimes separated by geography and time. Forensic genealogy receives validation as a revolutionary investigative tool, but privacy advocates raise concerns about genetic databases that allow law enforcement access to millions of Americans' DNA information. The debate balances public safety against constitutional protections in ways that courtrooms will litigate for decades. Academic conferences feature the yogurt shop case as a textbook example of how scientific advancement can overcome investigative limitations. Police departments worldwide study Austin's experience to improve their own cold case procedures. Brasher's nomadic lifestyle as a traveling mechanic provided perfect cover for criminal activity, spanning multiple jurisdictions. His ability to disappear into anonymous American mobility explains how he avoided detection while accumulating victims across state lines. International media coverage emphasizes the case's broader implications for criminal justice reform. European outlets examine American interrogation techniques that produced false confessions, while Canadian broadcasters explore genetic privacy issues raised by genealogical databases. The renewed investigation generates dozens of tips about other unsolved cases that might involve Brasher's. FBI task forces examine murders in states where he lived or worked, looking for ballistic matches and behavioral patterns that could clear additional cold cases. Construction begins on an expanded memorial at the original crime scene, designed to honor not just the 4 victims but also the concept of justice delayed but not denied. The monument will include quotes from family members and investigators who refuse to abandon hope. Austin prepares for the formal memorial dedication ceremony that will mark the end of one chapter and the beginning of healing. November 2025, Travis County District Attorney's Office. Families of Jennifer, Sarah, Eliza, and Amy gather with investigators and prosecutors for a private roundtable that addresses 34 years of questions, mistakes, and scientific breakthroughs. Detective Santos presents a comprehensive timeline linking Brasher's to Texas during the winter of 1990. 1. Travel records, employment history, and witness statements place him in the Austin area under an alias during the weeks preceding the murders. The revelation that Brasher's operated under false identities explains how he avoided detection for so long. Social Security records show him working at an auto repair shop in Round Rock, just 20 miles from the yogurt shop, during November and December 1991. Vehicle registration documents connect him to a pickup truck, matching descriptions from witness statements about suspicious activity near the shopping center in the days before the murders. The circumstantial evidence builds a compelling case that would have led to conviction if Brasher's had lived to face trial. Family members listen with mixture of relief and exhaustion as investigators explain how advanced forensic techniques succeeded where traditional methods failed. The science that cleared 4 innocent men also identified the real killer with mathematical certainty. The emotional toll of 34 years becomes apparent as parents describe how the unsolved case affected marriages, careers, and relationships with surviving children. Grief compounded by uncertainty created wounds that truth can heal, but time cannot reverse. Community representatives express gratitude to families for their persistence and dignity throughout decades of misdirected investigation. Their refusal to accept easy answers ultimately led to scientific breakthroughs that will benefit future cases worldwide. The following morning, District Attorney Hernandez will sign exoneration orders that formally clear 4 wrongfully convicted men, while acknowledging prosecutorial errors that destroyed innocent lives. November 15, 2025, Travis County Courthouse. Sunlight streams through tall windows as Judge Patricia Williams convenes the formal exoneration ceremony that officially clears Robert Springsteen and Michael Scott of all charges related to the yogurt shop murders. The courtroom gallery fills with family members, attorneys, reporters, and citizens who recognize the historical significance of the proceedings. Wrongful conviction exonerations remain rare enough to generate widespread attention and careful documentation. District Attorney Hernandez reads the official statement acknowledging prosecutorial error and investigative tunnel vision that led to false convictions. His words carry legal weight but cannot restore lost years or repair damaged reputations. The state of Texas formally acknowledges that Robert Springsteen and Michael Scott are innocent of all charges related to the December 6, 1991 murders of Jennifer Harbison, Sarah Harbison, Eliza Thomas, and Amy Ayers, Hernandez announces. Springsteen and Scott sit quietly as their names are cleared through judicial decree. The men who endured nearly a decade of wrongful imprisonment show little emotion, their faces reflecting exhaustion more than celebration. Judge Williams enters the exoneration into official court records, creating legal precedent that will protect both men from future prosecution while establishing their right to compensation for wrongful conviction. The paperwork transforms suffering into legal recognition of injustice. Family members of the original victims witness the ceremony with complex emotions. Relief that truth has emerged mixes with regret that justice required destroying 4 additional lives through prosecutorial error. Outside the courthouse, Springsteen speaks briefly to reporters. "I'm grateful the real killer has been identified, but I can't get back the years I lost. I hope this case teaches others about the dangers of false confessions." Sunlight illuminates the courthouse steps as cameras capture the conclusion of Austin's longest-running criminal case. The images will appear in textbooks about wrongful convictions and the transformative power of advancing forensic science. December 6, 2025, exactly 34 years after 4 girls closed a yogurt shop for the final time, Austin gathers at the Memorial Plaza for a dedication ceremony that honors victims while acknowledging the complex journey toward truth. Thousands attend the unveiling of an expanded monument featuring names, photographs, and biographical sketches of Jennifer, Sarah, Eliza, and Amy. The memorial includes quotes from family members and investigators who refused to abandon hope during decades of uncertainty. Mayor Rebecca Watson addresses the crowd. Today we remember 4 innocent lives stolen by violence, 4 wrongfully convicted men freed by science, and a community's 34-year journey from tragedy through injustice toward truth. A previously unseen diary entry from Jennifer surfaces during the memorial preparation, discovered in boxes her mother finally felt strong enough to examine. The handwritten note, dated December 5, 1991, describes Jennifer's excitement about finishing high school and starting veterinary studies. The diary excerpt becomes part of the memorial text, representing the dreams that died alongside 4 teenagers in a yogurt shop fire. Jennifer's optimism about the future makes her death even more tragic and meaningful. Bells toll 4 times as speakers read the victims' names aloud. Amy Ayers, Eliza Thomas, Jennifer Harbison, Sarah Harbison. Each name carries 34 years of memory, investigation, and ultimate resolution. Candles distributed throughout the crowd create a sea of flickering light that honors not just the original victims, but also the wrongfully convicted men whose suffering added layers of tragedy to the case. C.C. Moore attends the ceremony, representing the scientific breakthrough that finally delivered truth. Her presence acknowledges how technological advancement can overcome investigative limitations while validating families who never stopped believing justice would eventually arrive. Night falls over Austin as the ceremony concludes, but the memorial plaza remains illuminated by candles that burn until dawn, symbols of memory that survived 34 years of darkness. FBI investigation continues into Brasher's criminal network, seeking evidence of accomplices who might have participated in the yogurt shop, murders, or other crimes across multiple states. The genetic identification of the primary perpetrator opens new avenues for investigation. Travel records from the early 1990s reveal Brasher's movements through Texas, Tennessee, Kentucky, and Missouri, during periods when unsolved murders occurred in each state. The geographical correlation suggests a killing spree that claimed far more victims than previously suspected. DNA evidence from the Austin crime scene may have degraded beyond complete analysis, but investigators discover possible trace amounts of foreign material that could belong to a second perpetrator. The evidence remains too fragmentary for identification, but raises questions about whether Brasher's acted alone. Witness statements from 1991 consistently describe 2 men entering the yogurt shop near closing time. While memory distorts under trauma and time pressure, the consistency of multiple independent accounts suggests Brasher's may have had an accomplice who escaped identification. Tennessee authorities review unsolved cases from the same time period, looking for ballistic matches and behavioral patterns that could link Brasher's to additional murders. His .380 caliber weapon left distinctive markings that forensic specialists can trace across state lines. Online forums dedicated to true crime investigation buzz with speculation about Brasher's associates and possible accomplices. Amateur sleuths analyze public records, employment histories, and geographical movements, seeking connections that professional investigators might have missed. FBI maintains that the Austin case remains under investigation pending further evidence about possible accomplices. The identification of Brasher's as the primary perpetrator represents a major breakthrough, but questions about his complete criminal network require additional investigation. Without living suspects, the truth about Brasher's associates may remain forever buried. The case file receives the designation Cold Case Resolved, conditional, pending further evidence. Winter 2025 finds families of the original victims visiting graves and reflecting on 34 years of grief, hope, and eventual resolution. The identification of Robert Eugene Brasher's provides closure without peace, truth without the satisfaction of earthly justice. Jennifer and Sarah Harbison rest side by side in Austin Memorial Park, their headstones now surrounded by flowers left by strangers who learned their story through documentaries and news coverage. The case that made them famous in death also ensures their memory will endure. Memorial archives open to public viewing, displaying investigation files, court documents, and family photographs that tell the complete story of Austin's most notorious cold case. Visitors study evidence that seemed conclusive in 1999, but appears deeply flawed through modern scientific understanding. Sarah's surviving friend, now in her 40s, shares previously untold details about their final conversation on December 6, 1991. The phone call, focused on teenage concerns about boys and homework, becomes a poignant reminder of normalcy, interrupted by senseless violence. National news outlets feature retrospective coverage examining how the case influenced criminal justice reform, DNA analysis advancement, and public understanding of false confessions. Austin's tragedy becomes educational content for improving future investigations. The emotional cost of 34 years of uncertainty cannot be measured in news coverage or academic studies. Parents aged decades while seeking justice for murdered children, marriages fractured under grief's weight, siblings struggled with survivor's guilt, the wrongfully convicted lost irreplaceable years. Closure arrives not as triumph but as exhausted recognition that truth sometimes emerges despite systemic failure rather than because of investigative excellence. Justice delayed remains, justice denied, even when science eventually reveals what should have been discovered decades earlier. Winter approaches Austin, but the city feels lighter, unburdened by 34 years of unanswered questions. Legal experts and criminal justice reformers cite the yogurt shop case as a watershed moment for understanding false confessions and the limitations of traditional investigative techniques. Law enforcement agencies nationwide study Austin's experience to improve their own procedures. Texas mandates recording of all suspect interviews following legislative hearings that featured testimony from Springsteen and Scott about their wrongful convictions. The new law becomes known informally as the Yogurt Shop Standard among police departments and legal professionals. Police academy curricula incorporate case studies about confirmation bias, tunnel vision, and the psychological factors that produce false confessions. Future investigators learn how pressure to solve high-profile cases can lead to prosecutorial errors that destroy innocent lives. Legal reforms address interrogation techniques that proved ineffective and harmful in the Austin case. Extended questioning without legal representation becomes subject to judicial oversight, designed to prevent coerced statements from vulnerable suspects. Academic conferences examine the intersection of advancing forensic science and traditional detective work. The yogurt shop case demonstrates how genetic genealogy can succeed where conventional investigation fails, while also highlighting the importance of preserving evidence for future analysis. Justice programs use the case as required reading for students, studying wrongful convictions, false confessions, and the evolution of forensic science. Austin's tragedy becomes educational content that may prevent future investigative errors. Systemic change proceeds slowly through legislative sessions and judicial decisions that gradually reform how law enforcement handles high-profile cases. The victims of Austin's yogurt shop murders become symbols of the need for scientific rigor in criminal investigation. In classrooms across America, students watch archival footage of press conferences, courtroom proceedings, and family interviews that document 34 years of investigative evolution. Their silence reflects recognition that justice remains imperfect but improvable. December 6, 2025. The sun sets over Austin as the city marks the 34th anniversary of the yogurt shop murders with quiet reflection rather than desperate hope. 4 candles burn outside the Memorial Plaza, where teenagers once worked their final shifts. The rebuilt shopping center bustles with evening shoppers, unaware of the tragedy that occurred on this exact date 3 decades earlier. Time heals communities by allowing normal life to resume around spaces once defined by violence. Detective Santos, now reassigned to active cases, visits the memorial during her off-duty hours. The file that consumed her career for 2 years sits closed in archives, marked "Resolved," in green ink that signifies rare success in cold case investigation. Final forensic reports confirm Robert Eugene Brasher's sole responsibility for the Austin murders, with scientific certainty that eliminates reasonable doubt. His genetic fingerprint, ballistic signature, and behavioral pattern align perfectly with evidence recovered from the crime scene. Jennifer's mother, now 78, lights a candle for her daughters while cameras remain respectfully distant. Her dignity throughout 34 years of uncertainty makes her an icon of perseverance that transcends local tragedy. Local news coverage focuses on scientific advancement rather than investigative failure. Genetic genealogy receives credit for solving Austin's most notorious cold case, while honoring families who never abandoned hope that truth would eventually emerge. The lights of Austin shimmer across the plaza where the "I Can't Believe It's Yogurt" shop once stood. 4 names etched in stone catch the final rays of sunlight: Amy Ayers, Eliza Thomas, Jennifer Harbison, Sarah Harbison. After 34 years of silence, Austin finally exhales. Justice has arrived not as punishment, but as truth reclaimed from time's erosion. The case is closed.